Terry and Jesse, we always say we're too blessed to be stressed. We're too anointed to be disappointed. And if hope was money, we'd be a billionaire.
No, they'll never take us under, because we're bringing truth like thunder. Raining on your speakers like a ton of bricks. Hold the cross high.
We have our good friend Dr. Louis Sandoval, who has his own show on Virgin Most Powerful regarding mental illness, depression, anxiety, and diabolical addictions. So, Dr. Sandoval, welcome to the Terry and Jesse Show.
Hey, guys. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. Well, I wanted to have you on for two fronts. One, I understand that you are in a position to give us some updates on the COVID-19 because of your work as a doctor in Orange County. And then the second question, after we get that handled, I want to talk a little bit about your new show on Virgin Most Powerful. So for those who would like to get a little update, give us your background with how you're working with the COVID-19 issue, Doctor.
Sure, absolutely. You know, it's such a hot topic right now, and everybody's concerned, and there's so many changes. Right now, I am on what we call the crisis triage team for our organization, which means that I'm one of the doctors in charge of figuring out if we ever do get to crisis levels of people being infected and needing medical help, how are we going to help them out? How are we going to distribute care? And how are we going to make sure that we do it equitably? So we are always checking the numbers and seeing what's going on. And what I want to reassure viewers about is that even though we have this team and we're prepping it and getting it ready for any kind of crisis emergency, right now we're hoping we never need to use it, and it's looking that way.
Good.
Our numbers are looking great. The cases are going down.
Great.
And, of course, we should always be prepared for any crisis.
Sure.
But right now, everything's improving. I always tell people, continue to keep the good hygiene, and we should be doing that anyway.
Absolutely.
Continue to keep wearing your mask as required by the state and whatnot.
Yep.
We'll keep doing our part in doing that. But, to ease fears of people, the numbers are looking great. They're going down. The death rates are going down. And so
Excellent.
I would tell people, just keep doing what you're doing. I always encourage my patients to get out of the house as much as possible, wear your mask. But if you need to go to the store, wash your hands, get some fresh air, do something, because you want to keep as much sense of normalcy in spite of everything that's going on.
Well said. Doc,
Doc, let me ask you a question. Sizable homeless population.
Big time.
Have you guys found, is that kind of a melting pot, or is that kind of a petri dish for more cases of COVID-19, or are they basically, is COVID-19, the cases found amongst the homeless, is it pretty much the same as the general population that's locked up at home and washing their hands and wearing a mask?
Yeah, great question, Jesse. For now, we've seen pretty much the same. I mean, we haven't seen any big distinguishing features. You notice if there were something, you would look on the news and they would tell you, oh, geez, we're going to reach out to the homeless population. We're going to make sure that we address them, and we're going to asking for donations for masks or anything for this population that might not have the same resources as anyone else. But you're not hearing any of that because we're not seeing much of a difference. It's an interesting question you posed there, Jesse.
Yeah, I'm just saying, because you would think, because a lot of them don't wash their hands, a lot of them are using the toilet number 1 and 2 in public, a lot of them don't have access to showers every day, they're not social distancing, they're right next to each other. So I'm just wondering, I would think that there would be an explosion of COVID-19 amongst the homeless population, but we don't see that. So I just scratch my head. I'm just wonder, interesting, you have a segment that's at home, locked down, washing our hands, putting on masks, social distancing. Another wing of the population, even rioters, they're not doing any of that. And so I was just wondering, you as a doctor, if you guys are seeing more cases of COVID-19 amongst anarchists and rioters and homeless people, or is it pretty much the same all across the boards?
That's a great point, too, because one of the other things to consider is that there are a lot of what we call asymptomatic cases. So somebody might be carrying the virus and might never know it. They might never end up with symptoms or anything along those lines that would even prompt them to get tested.
Right.
So that could be, what's happening. They could be in the population and they just don't come to our clinics. So that's another thing to consider. But what I will say is this: we're not hearing of any increased death rates among the homeless population. We're not necessarily hearing about people on the streets being found dead because of this. And our treatment in the hospitals and whatnot has not been reaching surge levels, so we're very lucky right now.
Yes.
It's an interesting point you make where when people are really worried about this is why I always tell people, just keep good hygiene, follow the recommendations for the mask, but don't be afraid if you need to go to the store. Don't be afraid if you need to go even to your doctor's clinic. Honestly speaking, at the clinics, I know a lot of people are afraid of even going, and they're not getting their heart checked or their diabetes checked and things like that. And what I let these people know is, at our medical clinics everywhere, we're probably cleaner than some of the retail stores because we're actually checking temperatures and cleaning things regularly for people when they need to come in. So keep that in mind, too. If you're, I always like to tell the general population, don't forget that there's other diseases out there, and don't stop to get treated for that because you might beat COVID, but I don't want you to die of something else.
Hey, man, Dr. Sandoval, you've done a whole show. I was with you on how to handle emotionally, spiritually, even your mental approach to dealing with COVID-19. And people can get that show by going to Virgin Most Powerful Radio under the Dr. Sandoval Show as a podcast. But I want to give you an opportunity because a lot of people listening have never heard you before. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing with the new show that you started on Virgin Most Powerful Radio?
Oh, that's such a great show, and I thank you guys for the opportunity to even speak out there, and I hope that it's helpful to people. It's on Thursdays from 11 to noon. Right now we're pre-taping them and making sure that we reach out different topics. I always encourage our listeners that if they have any questions on mental health, to go ahead and email us or call in and just let us know what topics might be of interest to you. I'm putting out different topics that I hear about in the clinic or that people ask me about in particular, because the most important thing with mental health is that we can't separate it from our spiritual health. The most, we're healthiest when we're spiritually healthy, more than even physically healthy. I've seen some very, very sick patients in the hospital, but boy, their faith in God is strong and they keep their spiritual health up, and they seem to do much better than patients who don't have that level of faith. It's the same thing in the mental health world. When we can blend the mental health and the spiritual health together and recognize what's coming from us, what's coming from potentially spiritual influence, be it demonic, or we cannot forget the influence of grace. A lot of times we think, oh, geez, how do we account for demonic activity? And a lot of times I'll ask my patients, well, how do you account for grace? We forget to look at that, and hopefully we can talk about that in our show and look at the positive side of life and really get closer to Christ.
Dr. Sandoval, go ahead, Jesse.
Let me ask
follow up.
Dr. Sandoval, it's kind of off the plumb line here, but it's just something that's in my head that I've been wanting to ask you.
Sure.
Can you define DID for us, DID, and how is DID separate from a person who's diabolically possessed? Because sometimes they manifest the same symptoms, DID and possession. So what is DID, excuse me?
Yeah, we don't know what that is. What is it?
And why is it that they don't need an exorcist, they need a mental health expert?
That's a great question, Jesse, and it's a hot topic even within the psychiatric world. DID is also called dissociative identity disorder, and usually this happens when somebody experiences some kind of a trauma. Unfortunately, if somebody's had an abuse-type situation or has been in a situation where they see potentially death in front of them, what tends to happen is we say that the mind can dissociate from the body. So you hear a lot of people who say, yes, unfortunately I was abused or something, but at that time it was kind of like my mind floated away and I could see it happening outside my body. When that happens to people as a result of the trauma, sometimes the mind really needs to cope in different ways, and then people will say that they develop different personalities. Depending on who you ask, somebody might have, some of the psychiatrists might say it's a different personality, or it's a different zone or dimension that the mind goes into in order to not have to face the traumatic event, because sometimes it's just too much for the mind. When that's the case, you really need to get into therapy, somebody who understands dissociative identity disorder, somebody who understands that you got to process what happened to you, shall we say, in different little chunks and not all at once. We say exposure therapy, just kind of taking baby steps to address what happened. This is different from demonic possession, but it can be easily confused because if the mind goes into a different state, it seems like you're talking to a different person at that time. And in diabolic possession, then you worry because you're talking to the person and all of a sudden a demon will come out. And so now you have two different entities. In DID, it's the same person, just that the mind goes into different zones. In possession, then you're talking about two different entities. And that's why it can be so confusing. But that's why with DID, you're dealing with a person, you want to go to therapy. With possession, obviously, you want to talk to a priest or an exorcist.
Wow. Awesome.
Deep stuff. See, this is the type of intel you're going to get when you listen to the Dr. Louis Sandoval show. I mean, this is high-level stuff here. My mind is popping right now. I feel the positive and negative jumper cables just touched each other. That's what's happening in my mind when I hear this guy speak. Gary?
Dr. Lewis, I want to also mention that people on the radio right now that are listening don't have our app. They can always go and get our app by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org and downloading the app on your smartphone, and then you can start listening to all the podcasts. But this is high information, especially think about this, everyone. You go to a psychiatrist, you're going to spend hundreds of dollars to go there. Dr. Louis Sandoval is actually giving principles that he works every day with patients on, and he has a good Catholic mindset and also understands spiritual warfare. I really would recommend anyone to listen to his shows by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org or downloading the Virgin Most Powerful Radio app or going on YouTube on the Virgin Most Powerful Radio YouTube channel. Dr. Lewis, your final thoughts about your